An historic heat wave in Europe has killed more than 1,000 people so far in Spain and Portugal, is melting infrastructure, and has sparked wildfires across the continent. Average temperatures have been around 36 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the UK, reaching above 104 degrees at London's Heathrow Airport and 115 degrees in parts of Spain. Central Asia is in the midst of a heat wave right now as well, with temperatures 20 degrees above normal. And here in the U.S., more than 100 million people are currently under heat advisories or excessive heat warnings. In some areas, like Texas, the heat is already causing strain to the state's electric grid, as temperatures in major cities like Dallas soar to around 110 degrees. Here at home, we're in day one of what's expected to be a prolonged heat wave, with Boston Mayor Michelle Wu among those declaring a heat emergency, saying yesterday, quote, "It is clear that a changing climate is a risk to our health and communities." Most scientists agree that climate change is to blame for what's going on in Europe and Texas as well. But as for a plan of action to fight it, that's a lot less clear-cut. President Biden had proposed the plan to cut U.S. emissions in half by the end of this decade, but West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin, or Saboteur Joe Manchin, as Bernie Sanders calls him, joined Republicans in blocking the proposal. And then there's the Supreme Court, which, when not busy making reproductive care harder to get and weapons easier to get, is stripping some of the regulatory authority of the EPA. Now it appears Biden is taking things into his own hands, with the reports of a planned trip to Massachusetts tomorrow, where he's expected to announce new executive action on climate, although just how far he might go is still unclear. And of course, whatever it is likely to be challenged again in the country's highest court. So as the world burns, literally, what can be done to combat a climate crisis that so many have worked for years to politicize? And how much time do we realistically have left to act? I'm joined by Joseph Curtatone, former mayor of Somerville, now the president of the Northeast Clean Energy Council. Also joined by Amy Myers Jaffe, research professor and managing director at the Climate Policy Lab at Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Joe and Amy, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Amy, starting with you, if I can. So much of the planet is burning. We have a corporate-friendly court, a fossil fuel-owned Congress. Yet in the New York Times poll the other day, virtually nobody lists climate as their top priority. 1% overall, 3% even among people under 30. Why is the number so pathetically low?
Well, I think that so many things have happened in the last year, whether it's the pandemic or inflation. And so people, even watching the news about the war in Ukraine, so I think people are just overloaded with crisis. And I think the climate crisis, takes sort of a backseat to some immediate problem that's happening today. But really, the immediate problem happening today is very much attached to the climate crisis. So I think the polling is quite disappointing. And we still have time to act. Mm-hmm. And so on some of these other problems, there's things we can't control. But on climate change, there really are things that individuals can do. There are things we can ask our government to do.
Well, can we talk about those in a second? I want to stay on the poll with you for a second, Joe. Picking up on what Amy talked about the immediacy, what a number of analysts have said about this poll beyond Amy is a variation on that theme, is most people in this country don't consider the climate threat imminent. It's somewhere far off. They don't deny that it's a problem, but it's down the line. Where's the failure? Where's the disconnect? Because as Amy said, it is immediate.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that poll, even though it's humbling. It should be shocking for us, but should it be a surprise? Because what we've lacked in this effort on climate action is a narrative that is human, that plucks the value string. Mm-hmm. I think to Amy's point, we are crisis worn. The Damocles of a crisis is clear. And in my organization, we lead the climate tech, clean energy industry. And one of the important pieces of the narrative that we are going to emphasize is there's certainly the Damocles of the crisis. We see that in the news, like the examples, Jim, you give. We see that every day around the world, but also the opportunity to carve a new economy, unlike anything we've seen in recent history. And the absence of that narrative, compounded by the crisis of a pandemic, so much as done a few things. Either people believe, what can I do that'll really have an impact? Have we gone too far, or is it real, or we're in a bit of a denial? And that's human nature. And we need to make sure we keep going at the narrative, but we connect with people's value strings.
Well, Joe, you have a recent piece in Commonwealth Magazine. You talk about Charlie Baker's request for more than $1 billion from the Recovery Act for climate resiliency. Massachusetts is one of the states taking the lead, attempting to fill the hole that the feds have left, correct?
That's correct. You mentioned it with the Supreme Court's decision and the efforts, lack of efforts by Senator Joe Manchin, whether it's or maybe his explicit efforts to thwart President Biden's agenda, and extremely hopeful and keeping our fingers crossed that he takes executive action, declares a national climate emergency, which will allow him great leeway to take necessary steps. The Biden administration has always done a lot of things, certainly around wind and solar and unlocked markets, but states now are leading. And we're seeing that really across the country. But in New England, we've seen that Rhode Island and Connecticut took big steps towards, this year with 100% clean energy electricity laws. Massachusetts has a few short weeks to take a step in that same direction, but done a lot of great work. We are cautiously optimistic they will. Governor Baker has led in this and is really looking to make a major investment, which we applaud, on the climate technology industry, not unlike what we did around life sciences, as you recall, Jim, many years ago. And look how that's paid off. This is an opportunity that if we dare to take it, would unlock an economic opportunity in a way that leads with equity that we haven't seen. And so when in our lifetimes have we seen such an important cause like climate action inextricably tied to not only business development, but economic opportunity.
Yeah, but
that's the message we have to hammer home.
Joe Curtatone, you say all across the country, and you then cite, obviously, New England, Connecticut, and Rhode Island.
Sure.
What do they have in common? The two states are led by Democrats. There is a red-blue state divide on this whole issue of states doing what the feds are not, Joe, is there not?
Well, there is, but however, there are great examples where states have led. I mean, when will I ever give Texas an example when a state is led? But Texas is a good example where the wind and solar infrastructure upheld their grid during the hottest months. We're seeing advances in agricultural technology, which is important to, fostering the ecosystem. There are examples. Now, there's a big gap there in many states, but this is not, the opportunity is not exclusive to the Northeast or the West Coast. It's across the country. If we dare to take it, the investments need to be made across our country.
So, Amy, I'm sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Sometimes you have to separate the political rhetoric, which is unfortunate, from what's actually happening. So one of the things that actually has happened in Texas, to Joe's point, is they have actually passed and reformed the rulemaking so that they can apply more battery storage and other kinds of new technologies to sort of help protect the grid from the unreliability factor. And some of these new technologies are really quite helpful. So I do think you see, even in the red states, you do see people taking actions. You see non-governmental organization, banding together to help people in times of crisis, whether that's a heat wave. You see more cities looking at cooling centers and other kinds of facilities. So I think there is this potential for local action.
Amy, Joe Curtatone just mentioned executive action by Joe Biden. Ed Markey was on the radio with us this morning, also mentioned it, hoping it comes in Somerset tomorrow when he visits Brayton Point. Briefly, what could Joe Biden do without congressional authorization?
Well, I mean, there are, policies that can be put into place that are either encouraging, like we said, sort of some emergency regulations that might favor cleaner emission, cleaner low carbon fuels, and also just sort of workarounds to the rules we already have on the books.
He could also say things like no drilling on federal lands, but he's already all in on that, is he not, Amy?
I think we have to make a distinction. People don't cut the president slack. Because we have this issue of what are we doing for 3 months because of the crisis with Russia?
Yeah.
And what's the 10-year trajectory? That's where I think the president sort of tries to navigate.
Thread the needle, right.
Right, because in a place like New Mexico, allowing companies to drill for natural gas, and then that natural gas is going to be exported to Europe. Those wells are only going to last for a year. And so that doesn't obligate us to, 30-year facility.
Understood.
Like the export terminal, which we don't want to do.
Joe, you want to say briefly about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to build upon that to Amy's point. Look, the Biden administration has done a lot to unlock markets and bring technologies to the forefront. We have ready technologies that have matured to a level that are reduced by 60% our emissions over the next 10 years. That's big. And the others have to come to a level of maturity. So the president has the ability, like he's done around the solar tariffs and to advance wind, to help unlock markets, like Charlie Baker wants to do with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Those technologies are across the country. We have seen the greatest increase in investment on the venture capital side. I think a 3,250% increase in the last 18 months alone on climate tech. We're seeing traditional lending that way. This means jobs. This means revenue. Those benefits are localized to every city and every community and every state in this country. And we're going to be a leader. And the markets are going down. I'll just say this. Clean energy jobs have outpaced fossil fuel jobs, not because they're taking jobs, but because industries like coal, where our friend Senator Manchin comes from the state, big on coal, those industries have changed because of machination and technologies. You need less people power to do the work. So that's already happened in global markets. And today, as we speak, there are billions of dollars ready to be deployed on climate technologies and clean technologies that will help buffer us against inflation, because we know inflation negative impacts will lag.
Amy, I want to go back to you. Obviously, we don't operate in isolation in the United States. And when Senator Markey was with us on the radio this morning, I asked him about how we remain global leaders when our Congress and our Supreme Court is in retreat. And here's part of what Senator Markey had to say.
You cannot preach temperance from a bar stool. You cannot tell the rest of the world what the best behavior is if you're not engaging in it yourself. And so whether it's climate or women's rights or gun safety, we're in a process of losing our moral authority, and as a result, our political authority.
So, Amy, that's a real conundrum, I assume. I wouldn't want to be John Kerry today. What's the way around this? Is there a workaround?
Well, I think the president has to use what he already has. He has the infrastructure he can put forward and fast track because we've already approved it in the infrastructure bill. The EPA still has regulatory authority over power stations. There's still regulatory authority over, emissions for
individual
automobile.
Power stations. Individual power
stations, right? There's still the potential to do things in other sectors, which may be challenged in the courts. I mean, that's always the risk of executive action. But in the end, sometimes states do things that the president can build on. So, for example, state of California has declared they're going to put in a ban on the sale of gasoline cars after 2035. Yeah. And they're a big market. So if you're a car company today, are you going to continue to add, new facilities, to keep building, gasoline and diesel trucks? Maybe not, because California is such a big market. So to the extent that the president gets behind charging stations and helps, Connecticut Green Bank and the Massachusetts government in funding and implementing, charging stations, those cars are going to come one way or the other, whether the Supreme Court rules against an EPA regulation. And we have, other areas, what's our policy on emissions from trucks? There are just still a lot of areas where the Supreme Court has not ruled it down.
If you know of an available EV, Amy, you'll give me a buzz. Joe, I only have 30.
I did get one.
Call me after the show. Hey, Joe, I only have 30 seconds left. I'm sure you're asked the question all the time, which is, what's the point of no return and how close are we to it? What's the answer to both those questions?
I wish there was a bright line, but we know the impacts of the climate crisis are cumulative. You can't unwind it all. It builds upon each other. So we need to continue bringing technologies to market, delivering our climate action goals, building this new economy, and move to the just, rapid, and equitable transition to a clean energy future. This is about leadership and values. It's not exclusive to one party versus the other. We see Republican leaders and Democratic leaders leading on this in cities as well. This is how we do it. If it's state by state, city by city, region by region, we will help lead this transition.
Joe Curtatone, Amy Myers Jaffe, good to have you both. Thanks for your thoughts. Appreciate it.
Thanks for
Thanks,
having
Jim.
us.